Hi and welcome. The impact of UX research on your business strategy is brought to you by Radiant. This will be a 30-minute event. My name is Josh DuPont and I'm the marketing manager at Radiant, and I'll be your host. I'd like to thank you, thank our audience for taking the time out of their day today, and of course, our guest speakers. We have a lot of exciting conversation, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's do a brief rundown on today's agenda. We'll start with an introduction of our guest speakers, Dr. Racine Brown and Matt Gessler. Then we'll jump right into our fireside chat, followed by a live Q&A. Yeah. We'll have the live Q&A with the audience. If you'd like to participate in the Q&A, please submit a question or a comment in the chat, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Okay, let's go ahead and get moving. Our first guest is Dr. Racine Marcus Brown. He's a UX researcher and a research manager at Radiant. His UX research expertise and experience spans commercial and federal sectors. Matthew Gessler is Radiant's Director of Digital Experience. He has over 20 years of experience practicing executive level UX strategy, user experience management, and design. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Matt.
Thank you, Josh. Apologies to everyone on the call. I see we have a large group of attendees. I think, Josh, you had some audio issues while going through the agenda, but that's okay. We could all read the slide. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Really excited to do this. Racine, really, happy to be having this conversation with you. Hopefully we can, spark some ideas with our guests here today. So to start off, I think everyone is familiar with user experience design. Companies like Apple have really started to put that at the forefront, but not so many are aware about what UX research is. So Racine, could you summarize that for us?
Certainly. Before I do, I want to thank you, Josh, for hosting this webinar, and Matt for participating with me. So my tagline or mantra for UX researchers is make sure we build the right thing. And what UX researchers do is take research skills, usually qualitative, but sometimes quantitative, to make sure that the design team or the product team understands the needs of end users of the product and balances that with business needs and constraints and capabilities of the IT team. You use a variety of research methods to do that, as well as skills in kind of talking to and understanding, coordinating with different stakeholders.
So what are some of those key skills that a researcher would bring to the table?
Well, there's the methodological toolkit, things like contextual inquiry, basic user interviews, usability testing, of course, once a prototype is ready, but also just soft skills, people skills, and just being able to coordinate with people's schedules. Because a big difference between, say, UX research and, say, academic research is you have to, one, be focused on what the business or user goal is at all times, and two, you really need to be able to translate effectively and succinctly, what your insights are into the so what, not just users found this, this UI to be good, this part of the UI to be overly dense or clunky, but so what? Really helping executives, product leads, what have you, to understand, hey, here's what we're finding. Here's how this impacts, the current experience of a product or what you want to do.
So is it fair to say the goal of a researcher is to try to remove some of the subjective opinions? And
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You want to I mean, this is kind of fits into how it's, UX research can go beyond the product team into broader strategy. If a senior leader says, hey, I want widget X, the best solution isn't just to deliver widget X, because it might not be the best solution, but
Yeah.
why do you want widget X?
Yeah.
And kind of dig to the fundamental need or ask. And then, that allows the product and design teams to really get to the best solution.
Great. And Josh, can we move ahead to the next slide? Great. So Racine, you recently published on Radiant's blog a article about UX research for business strategy. So I would love for you to explain to our audience how that value add works, and specifically, are there any strategies that the researchers should follow to make the biggest impact?
Well, the value add is that I think the most obvious part is designing apps and software, but UX research methods and perspectives can be used for service design. So redesigning a whole process and the whole service with the technical component and the person-to-person component. Another key value add of UX researchers is, because of deep empathy with users, you can be the ethical voice on the senior leadership team, and then using methods like ethnography, contextual inquiry for either exploratory research or discovery research. UX researchers can discover new opportunities that the senior leadership might not have been thinking of before, or alternatively, have a unique way of seeing the impact, like what is the real market for a new idea that a leader might have. So like it's sort of not just pathfinding to optimize the app, but pathfinding to optimize the business strategy through a lot of those same techniques. And I'm sorry, could you review the second part of your question, Matt?
Well, yeah, so there are a couple things I actually want to hit on based on what you just said. So I was wondering, what are the specific strategies to follow to make an impact? But in addition, it sounds like you touched upon, I think, something that's very big in our community right now, and that's service design. And I really, looking at it from not necessarily just a app or a website point of view, but what is that overall experience? What is the CX? That you're trying to drive. So how, is research playing a part in determining that?
Well, let me take the strategic value portion first. I mean, I don't have a magic answer for that, but I think the most important thing is to think holistically and broadly and do your best as a UX researcher to get a seat at the table.
Is there anything that, we can do as practitioners to help move that needle? Because as someone who's done, UX design for, 20 some odd years, I feel like now we've kind of reached that critical point where I'm not necessarily singing for my supper anymore, right? Like people know the value of having UX designers, but I feel like maybe we're at the same point when it comes to research. And, how would you move that needle?
Well, I mean, building relationships, for me personally, I think I've kind of accreted social capital over time, just demonstrating value, not being super schmoozy and like pouncing on a director or other executive, but demonstrate value, get name recognition by demonstrating value in meetings, and, being at the top of your game in your product, your deliverables, and be it a report, a persona, what have you. And that's the balance of having comprehensive knowledge in your pocket from the research project, but distilling it to the so what factor, to like, this is the key takeaway you need to have. And then this is one thing I've had to learn coming from academia, don't bowl people over with facts and then get to the punchline at the end. As the military says, bottom line up front, tell people this is what we should do. Here's why, supporting detail, a wave top of supporting detail from, your insights, methodology, and then discuss further as the stakeholders want to discuss and are interested in. So that's how, another thing I think that helps, it's not everything in my opinion, but thought leadership on LinkedIn or other fora, that, first learn a lot about the craft and about business, and then, share your thoughts. It won't be perfect, but if you get it out there, it starts the conversation. And I think just, I've seen really senior UX researchers, thought leaders in the space. They post on UX research fora, of course, but they're also sharing their thoughts on LinkedIn, sharing in kind of cross-cutting fora of a discipline or business, what have you, and just demonstrating the value and getting the word out about that.
That's great. Josh, can we skip ahead? So getting on to research methods, and I think we touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, but what are some of the research methods that are most effective in informing business strategy? So whether it's qualitative, quantitative, how would you frame this, Racine?
Well, it's my summary answer to this is discovery research and exploratory research, and also mixed methods. And here's why. Usability testing is very necessary before you put a product out the door onto the market or onto your internal customers, but it's already really far downstream to influence strategy. So if you're doing, interviews are good. My ideal, I think it's very hard to achieve in business. My ideal is some sort of ethnography. If you're wanting to,
so like an ethnography to help drive what might be in your product backlog.
Exactly, ethnography of like, okay, you have the business has a general idea of where it wants to go, the types of customers, and I think it's a challenge. There's a challenge of budget and time, of course, but
it always is, Racine.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But the idea of like go forth and explore what needs are out there, and that is it's very hard to achieve. But if you can take that and say, hey, here are some major opportunities, that can hone in the business strategy. You can
when you say major opportunities, like how are you getting them? How are you showcasing those opportunities?
My approach is generally, it's fairly simple. Like for instance, I did something called a netnography. I won't claim to be Jedi master expertise on this, but read up on it. And so netnography is taking basic ethnographic methods and adapting it to really looking at online behavior. And we were developing an app, designing an app to help people, at a startup, to help people get to know their neighbors in urban areas. So I looked at user groups, like interest groups in a target market, Facebook groups, and really looked at the posts and their online interactions. And it, so I did some coding and analysis and surface themes about people post about luxury things, luxury real estate, things they like to buy and sell, leisure time like sports and things. These are expatriates in the United Arab Emirates with money and who have leisure time. So I surfaced those themes to guide the way that. And the good thing about this is I had a crash course timeline. It's like basically we had an approach to do an ethnography, and our business lead said, hey, you've got a week and a half to do this. So we had to scrub that plan, do a tighter ethnography of just observation, and didn't get to interview people. But we adjusted the plan as needed, and it didn't take a lavish budget, didn't take a lot of time, but it was upstream enough to inform, okay, how should we build this app? And the way I displayed it was a slide deck with a summary of, okay, here's based on the research, here's what we should do. So like recommendations, here are the major themes, maybe a little elaboration on methods, but I'm kind of unconventional. I like to put the so what of like, here's what I found, and then support it as succinctly as possible. And then, like I said, Matt, I always have more facts at my commands if people want to learn more, but don't bowl people over
So,
with.
well, how do you then deal with someone who might be, for lack of a better term, confrontational about that, like not necessarily open to those facts?
I mean, there's a balance here, and I won't say I'm perfect at it, but you approach the person as diplomatically as you can. So it's finding that way not to be confrontational in an angry, combative sense, but to say, okay, this is your decision, but here's what the data support. Like, the reason I'm saying something different is here is what the data support. And reiterate, okay, if you have any data to like what the possible monetary value of what your decision or what the cost might be, and that's not always ready to hand, but if you have that, and you have to be creative, and the more you know about the context and can bring that in too, you might be able to better support your position.
What I found in my career is, I think the main part of situations like that is finding out what the actual opposition is. It might not be obvious, and once you kind of get to that root cause, you can then adjust your tactic appropriately.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, and sometimes you've got to examine yourself. I mean, I've had projects where, I mistakenly didn't include all the right stakeholders at the beginning, and people got, the noses out of joint. But then you just have to reiterate, in a sense, go back and explain, here's what we were tasked to do, here's what we found. And it turns into, you're not presenting to win the debate, you're presenting as a jumping point for discussion to get to the best solution that people can live with.
Yeah, I think that self-awareness is important. It's funny, it's the one thing that all my failed relationships have in common is me. All right, I think, Josh, we can move on to the next slide. User experience research, business strategy concepts. I think we started to touch on this a couple of slides ago, but your latest blog post touches on distinctions between research insights informing basic business strategy and the value of having a research strategy. So can you really elaborate on these two concepts and how they differ?
Right. I mean, they're actually complementary, but strategic research that informs strategy is, again, that those research projects, insights that are positioned upstream, far enough upstream of the product pipeline to influence decisions about what, not only the specifics of how to design something, but even ideally you could have influence on what to do based on real data, with real people. So that's being, having the opportunity to do research far enough upstream of the process, and also having access to leaders or stakeholders at a high enough level to be able to, either directly or indirectly through your leadership, influence, say, here's some data you really should consider to influence the strategy. So that's strategic research. Business research strategy is just having a comprehensive plan, but flexible plan of, okay, what do we, if you're leading a research team, what do we care about? What are our areas of focus? What is our broad research plan? Now, you're going to plan for specific projects. What kind of methods and what kind of resources, human resources, tools, et cetera, do we need? What influence do I have on budget? What sort of budget should I lobby for? So it's those sort of pre-planning logistical considerations for, not just reacting to a request, but having plans, people, and training in place to be able to flexibly, to do a really comprehensive project if that's what's needed, or to do a pared down project if that's what's called for. But having a, not just informing the strategy of the business, but taking the business goals, mission statements, or whatever, and mapping that to your research department or teams. Mission, vision, like what are we about as a research organization or a research team?
So you mentioned training. Now, can you clarify what you mean by that? Now, are you talking about training within your team, or are you talking about training your colleagues, your stakeholders, in terms of the methods and practices that you are employing?
Yeah. So it's both. I think, especially if you have some newer folks that might have coursework or workshops or practica, but don't have a lot of real world UX research experience. It's a matter of training methodologies. But absolutely, especially if you have a small team, bare minimum, training, you want to train designers about research methods, because in many teams, especially smaller companies, UX researchers and designers need to collaborate and really work closer.
Or they're one and the same, right? They're the one.
In many cases, that is true. You have to double hat, and you can't specialize in one or the other, but have to be able to do both, at least at a basic level. But I think you have to train architects, product owners, maybe in some cases developers, enough about what you do to so they can understand the insights and see what value add you add to the team. But anytime, I believe in cross training. So if someone gets sick or can't make it, you have people, you have coverage, and it's not what people can do isn't just dependent on their job title, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And Josh, I think we can move on to the next slide. So I want to make sure that we leave some time open for questions, but really, Racine, what would you say are the takeaways from today's chat?
I mean, well, to me, the takeaways are, again, build the right thing, and build the right thing through better knowledge and insight from your research department and from other stakeholders. That researcher ideally is a bridge between end users, business leads, IT. You're not just a scientist. I like to think of myself as a scientist, but you're not just a scientist taking notes, but you're a facilitator, facilitating that collaboration as well. I think another thing is that for a successful UX research impact on strategy, you want to have people who can communicate very effectively in a business setting, deal with confrontational people, grow their brand and personal brand, disciplinary brand through demonstrating value.
Yeah.
And flexibility and adaptability. Certainly I think that's something we pride ourselves on at Radiant, is that we have the skills to get the job done, but if plan A doesn't work, we've got at least plan C, if not beyond, and can adjust on the fly.
Well said. Racine, really enjoyed this. Josh,
Yeah, me too.
Let's open it up to any questions that we might have.
Yeah, thank you both. That was a really engaging conversation. Yeah, for the sake of time management, let's go ahead and move on. There's already a few questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read off this first one. Says, what field of study makes a good UX researcher?
So I'll give my 2 cents here and pass it over to you, Racine. But I know today there are a lot of actual university programs where you can actually focus on user experience research. In the past, it's usually been, human-centered design, or library sciences has always been, a very big one. But Racine, what is your thoughts there?
Well, that stuff makes sense. Most of the UX researchers I know are psychologists, anthropologists.
Can't believe I left those two out.
Slight bias there. I mean, it's not, I think there's a wide range of people that can make good UX researchers, but a social science background helps. But having curiosity and a real passion for learning and growing yourself as a professional is a must, no matter what your specific disciplinary background, I think.
Well said. Josh,
If anybody in the audience has any questions or comments for our guests, you can put them in the chat now, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Let's move on to the next one. We've got, what are some of the factors that have the biggest impact for stakeholders?
so Racine, if you don't mind, I'll kind of jump in on this one and then like to get your input. But I think Racine hit upon this a lot, and it's that facts speak for themselves. So whether it is a correlation of qualitative data that you're showcasing what the themes are and marrying that with, some of your quantitative data of like, where people are dropping off, or where, how many errors they were seeing, or what their average handling time was, their time on task, so to speak. It's anytime you can remove the subjective nature from it and show the data, I feel that helps move the needle. But Racine, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I agree. I think showing data, triangulating is good if you can, the data, but also just demonstrating. It's like my wife always says, the so what factor. What you find, and this I have a tendency for tangents, and this helps me not go on so many tangents. It's like, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And what is the business value? Will it save money? Will it make money? Save headache and people do their job better. So grounding in those sorts of consideration, I think is something that business leaders really value in my experience.
Great, thanks. Here's the next question. UX isn't always associated with apps or UI. Can you provide an example of where you have been able to address the UX aspect of data flows that feed into several enterprise data consumers, both human and AI based, thus affecting the entire experience behind the scenes for many stakeholders?
So Racine, I know we're working on a project now that you can actually speak to, some of this experience. So go right ahead.
So, I mean, there's a project, can't go into too many details, but we're working on a project for enterprise, like a common platform for enterprise software, and trying to integrate different apps with disparate functions into a common library. And a lot of the insights, I get in empathy, defined sessions, etc., really bleed over into development or bleed over into business decisions. And so, the team I work on mostly focuses on design, but we make a concerted effort to, again, engage those business leads. Let's see, I was recently presented findings to a business lead where most of the stories, user stories that came up with were development stories. And so, we put our heads together. It's like, okay, who should we talk to? Who do we need to surface these insights to actually demonstrate value and make this happen? Because you could design screens, but more coordination was needed to actually effectively improve the UX.
And I would also add, I think, on this project that Racine is speaking of, a lot of what we're doing is trying to remove manual tasks from users, right? So can we automate and just remove it completely out of, say, the UI? There is no UX for it because it doesn't exist to the user anymore, because we can automate that behind the scenes. And, that really came out of research sessions in saying, with not only our end users, but with our development teams to, have these empathy sessions with them to determine, hey, what can we actually take off of the user's plate?
Well, these are some really good questions. Let's get to another one real quick. I know we're at the time, but let's do one more.
Sure.
In what settings would you share the report that focuses first on the so what? For example, for end of project stage debriefs or other aspects of the product development process?
I think it just, like how you lay out your presentation depends on your audience, of course. If someone's looking for a comprehensive report, then you want to do that. But lately, I've taken, unless directed to do otherwise, whatever stage of research I'm in, I have taken to surfacing insights, or even in some cases recommendations, fairly early on, because it's like, okay, here it's almost like a 1-2 punch. Here I am, here's my presentation, here's what I recommend you do. And then that, people are thinking, why should I do that? Here's the insights page, here's why. My personal belief that unless there's some cultural reason or some personal reason that someone doesn't want to have that presentation that way, or some formal rules of how a presentation is laid out, there's no reason not to put the bottom line up front.
Yeah, I think the short of the long here is waiting to the end for like a debrief. You've already lost them.
Yes.
You need to ensure that you're communicating and preaching that so what early and often, because that really can level set the direction of your research, or of the project on a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's go ahead and stop there. I want to thank you both, Matt and Racine, again. Thank you, and thank you to our audience for taking the time out.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Really had fun today.
Yeah, great. A copy of this recording will be on our website that is listed here on the screen. All right, bye-bye.